All right. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Books for My Soul, Meet the Author, where we meet our favorite authors and we get to interact with them. So today we are with Jesca Makena, author of a wonderful book called Healed, which I myself have read and really enjoyed it. She's written 3 books, actually. Healed is her 3rd and most recent. She's also a blogger. She is a minister of the gospel, and she's also recently married, and we'll talk to her about that shortly. So karibu, Jesca.
Asante sana. Thank you so much.
So good to have you here. You know, you told me before we started that your 1-year anniversary is in exactly 17 days. So congratulations in advance.
Thank you so much. We are so excited. I can't believe it. Yeah, thank you.
I know. Oh, this is wonderful. I look forward to another time when we'll talk about your journey in marriage.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Today we want to look at your book, Healed. And remember, Jesca, when I got this book, I got it from you one day. I read it, and I'm telling you, I didn't stop reading it until 2 a.m. In fact, it was 2:18 a.m., I remember. And when I finished reading it, I texted you on Facebook telling you this is such a wonderful book. And so I'm so excited to have you here today because I want others to pick up a copy of this book and just learn from it. So our reading audience, the book Healed is a raw and honest memoir about Jesca Makena. And it touches on her life in her early 20s. You know, Jesca, as we were beginning this session, we talked about how in our early 20s, you know, we did some things. And why it's not for the grace of God, I tell you, I don't know where we would be. So, but I want to start by asking you your journey of writing. What caused you to write this particular book?
Oh, wow. So I remember when I joined a church ministry, my pastor used to give me a lot of assignments to write prayer bulletins. And that's when I began to realize, I think I love writing. And so I began, because I was very passionate about prayer, so I began writing about some of the things that God had taught me over the years about prayer and how to make prayer easy and how people can enjoy their prayer time. So, and then later on, I started my blog, which I began writing on a consistent basis. So by the time I was getting to the memoir, I remember I'd gone through so much in my life. And because of being a minister and people just seeing the highlights of my life, many people used to feel discouraged that I cannot pray like Jesca. You know, they used to joke that I live in heaven. You know, and it used to bother me down deep within because I'm like, you have no idea the things I've done, the places I've been. If there's anything good you're seeing, then it's the grace of God. And only the people who are very close, because I'm a very private person and I have very few people in my world. So I used to share with my friends about my journey. And from that time, I began having a burden, like I would want to share my journey with people. I want them to know that I'm not this perfect person, that I've gone through some stuff and God has brought me out. That the fact that they're also struggling doesn't mean that God hasn't called them, God hasn't chosen them, that He has still called them and He has still chosen them, and they can still experience Him and they can still be used powerfully by Him. So yeah, that's what really triggered my reason and the burden as to why I really felt like I needed to write this book. Yeah,
and it's an excellent book. I remember when I was reading it, just thinking through, you know, your life at that point, how you were so vulnerable, young, in your early 20s, just getting to college. And then because of your vulnerabilities, some things happened in your journey of life, you know? And I won't call them mistakes or errors. I would call them, you know, T.D. Jakes calls them potholes on the way to destiny. Potholes on the way to destiny. And I watched a sermon that he gave on that topic, and it somewhat describes some of the potholes that you went through in your early 20s. So if I may ask, if you could share with us one of those potholes, what happened, and then show us how you managed to overcome.
Yeah, so one of the really big potholes, if I may call them like that, is when I finished high school and I joined campus. And obviously, you're starting campus life, you're innocent. Personally, I was innocent. I wasn't aware of a lot of things because I grew up in the village. I went to school both in primary and high school in Meru. So I wasn't aware, actually, I wasn't exposed much. So when I was finishing high school and I joined campus, I didn't know much. So I remember this time when someone very close to me invited me to meet this prophet, and I was like, I was intrigued. I remember that time actually I was in a mission trip. So I left the mission trip, came down and went to meet that prophet. And I remember the day before I went to meet him, I had this dream where I saw the prophet kissing me, and I was like, should I really go? Should I not? And I asked, I called the person. I was like, "Oh, are you sure we should go?" And the person was like, "You're an adult, you can, you can take care of yourself, And just for context, at that time in my life, I was going through a lot of shakeups in my friendships. I was also like serving the CEO, and people were talking about me. So I felt like I was vulnerable. I was alone, and I felt like I didn't have support. So I was like, what would it cost me to go see that prophet? So I went and saw him. I met him, and because of what I was going through in that moment, so he spoke some words to me which were encouraging and comforting. And because he understood that I loved Juanita Bainab's music, so he played that music and it was soothing and comforting. So the second time I went to see him, that's when he slept with me for the first time. And I remember that time I felt while he was doing whatever he was doing, I didn't have the inner strength. I didn't have the boldness, something that God has developed in me over the years. I didn't know how to say no. I didn't have that confidence, that self-worth to say no, that self-esteem to say no. So I just allowed him to do what I wanted to do. But down deep within, I was like, can you just take your hands off me? But I didn't have that inner strength, that inner boldness to say no. And that continued for a while, by the way, until one time there was so much chaos. And I was like, you know what, I am done. And I remember it was during a service and I just left, and later on after that I began now struggling with a lot of anxiety. I was struggling and fighting depression. I couldn't study anymore. I could not study anymore. Actually, as a matter of fact, I'm still trying to finish that degree that I started a decade ago, but thankfully I'm about to finish. But the impact of meeting that prophet was chaotic. Everything that could go wrong in my life went wrong. And I remember I was sharing with you, Polly, like earlier on, that it was until recently where God healed that regret. I'd look back in my life over that time and I would cast my journey. I'd be like, I wish I never met that person. My life would have been different. It was until recently when I looked back and I realized, wait a minute, that I'm still alive. I've known people who have gone through what I went through and they never made it. They died because of the trauma and the impact of what they went through, the shame, the pain, the emotional pain, the emotional like anguish and all that. But for me, I survived, I made it. And, it was recently that I felt God healing that regret. And I could look back now and be like, God, I'm grateful for that, because I feel like I'm different. There's a person I've become who I think I couldn't become if I didn't go through what I went through. Like there's a level of compassion that I have towards people because I've met people who actually the common testimony I've received from the memoir is people saying, I relate with your story. I've gone through everything you've gone through. And for me, I'm able to bring understanding to the table. I'm able to give them hope. Like recently, someone texted me and she was sharing with me a current story right now. She's in the middle of a mess. And I was telling her, you know what? One day everything is going to be all right. There's hope for your journey. There's hope. So yeah, everything will make sense. Absolutely. And I remember encountering that false prophet because it was a false prophet anyway. But later on, when I left that and I went to a different ministry, God used my pastors to heal me, and
Yeah.
I remember my pastor telling me one day, if the church broke you, God will still use
Yeah.
the same church to bring healing and restoration to you. Whatever broke you, God will use the same system to bring
Yeah.
healing to you. So yeah, so right now I'm in a much better place. It was years of struggling with anxiety and depression and fear. It was not a one-time thing. I remember one time feeling like I'm in such a hole that I'll never come out. My life will never come out. I'll never see the light at the end of the tunnel. And when God brought me out, it was like a miracle. I'd look back and I'm like, I'm no longer in a dark hole. There's
Yeah.
hope, there's a future, and for that I'm grateful. Yeah. Yeah.
As I was reading your book, Jesca, I was thinking to myself, the parable of the wheat and the tares. And when I
Absolutely.
read about the emotional abuse, even we can call it maybe spiritual abuse,
Absolutely.
because this false spiritual leader even took advantage of you sexually. And the way I understood it, it was, several times, and caused and caused so much havoc in your life and consequences,
Yeah.
And I gained comfort in the fact that these are tares in the wheat, and not all, not all who are called by God behave that way. And I was so glad to see that actually it was other servants of God who brought you to healing. That was so encouraging to me. So, but then you also told me that there's a girl of who went through similar and didn't make it. Actually, that the emotional and spiritual and other types of abuse led to her death. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Which is so
So,
sad, Yeah.
So what would you share? Somebody, a young girl somewhere who's going through some type of abuse and thinks she's in a safe space, either in church or with people that she trusts. And, especially in that vulnerable age of our early 20s, where, we've come out of high school, we have a little bit of freedom, and now we find ourselves in hot soup. What would you advise such a young person?
I know one of the greatest pitfalls or potholes for such people is despair, despair. And I would like to tell them that there's hope, that God is able to bring them out. God is able to heal them. Sometimes we go through very traumatic experiences and emotional abuse and all these things which are very deep and which are very rooted within us. And we feel like, it's impossible. I don't think it's possible for me to ever get over this. It's impossible for me to ever feel different, to ever feel like I'm pure, to ever feel healed. But I want you to know that nothing is impossible with God. That God loves you, He cares about you, and He sees you. The scripture talks about Hagar, how she was also being abused by Sarah, and you know what? I'm running away. And the scripture says that when God met her in the wilderness, He called the Lord the God who sees me, the God who sees me. And one of the things about people go through such situations, you feel like you're not seen, especially if you're going through someone For me, it felt like one thing I didn't share with you, Polly, is that after what I went through, especially in the church, the abuse and the heart, is that I struggled for a long, even later on, even when I moved to a very beautiful ministry, I struggled to feel like the Lord saw me. I struggled. Actually, I felt like I will never be safe, that God doesn't love me, God doesn't care. And I want you to know that God sees you, you matter to God, and He cares about you. And there's actually hope, and God is able. You might not see the way out, but God is able to miraculously bring you out of that situation. I've seen the Lord snatch me out of depression. I've seen the Lord, like the healing of my anxiety was suddenly. One moment I'm fighting anxiety, the next moment it's gone. And it's been gone now for a number of years, So like God is able to supernaturally heal you of your emotional wounds, of the trauma, of the anxiety, of the depression and all those things. So
there is hope. And one of the things I saw in your book, you say, God binds the brokenhearted and makes them whole. You know, I thought that was so powerful. And actually, when I read this book, I was like, I even want the young people around me to read it, because not only does it describe what we go through, you know, when we are young and vulnerable, but it shows God's hand really in how he's able to lead you out of such a difficult situation and make you whole, to the point where you're even ministering, Jesca, you and your husband. You know, that is so exciting.
I know.
I can see a copy of the book there behind you, but if you have another copy, show us so we can see it nicely, and tell us. I know it's available on Books for My Soul. How much can we expect to pick it up at?
As an ebook, you can pick it up at 500 shillings. Yes, for physical copy at 1,300 shillings. Yeah. Okay.
So I want to end with something I read at the back here that was written by a common friend of ours who's a counseling psychologist. She says, this book is like a fragrant flower. It has layers and petals that are thrilling to unravel. Each time you go deeper, the scent gets richer, more disarming. You can almost taste the beautiful leading of God betwixt the pages. A delightful symphony. This is what 1 year counseling psychologist. I do agree. It's a beautiful book, full of layers. You walk through the journey with Jess. You cry with her when she cries. You laugh with her when she laughs. You speak with God with her when she's like asking him what's going on here. And the most important is that you hear God. You see God through the pages. And so I welcome our reading audience to pick up a copy at Books for My Soul as an EPUB. That's an ebook format for 500 shillings. And if you'd like a print copy, you just get hold of Jesca through her social media pages, and she will be able to get it to you. So thank you, Jesca, for being with us today. And we'll look forward to seeing you. I know this is not the last book. We'll see you again soon.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you so much,
everyone.
Pauline.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone, and see you soon.